Hello friends, today I am going to take a look at using the markup, extensibility, and compatibility features of the Open XML SDK to process text. There are some interesting scenarios where this feature of the Open XML SDK makes it significantly easier for us to process Open XML documents. Here's a super simple OpenXML document. It has 4 paragraphs in it. And here's a simple OpenXML SDK program to open up the word processing document to get out all the paragraphs of the document and then append all the text of all the runs in the paragraph together, append an environment.newline to that, and then aggregate all of those strings together and output that to the console. And when we run it, we see all of the text of that document. Now let's do something a little bit interesting. I'm going to open up this document and I'm going to insert a text box into this document. Just for the sake of neatness, I'll move it over there so that we can see that the text box is in the same location as where its anchor was. Now let's run our simple program again. And look at this. We see the text box text twice. Well, what gives with that? Let's go look at the markup of that document. To look at the markup of that document, I'm using the OOXML tool extension for the Chrome browser. This is a really awesome tool that enables you to open up and look at the markup of OpenXML documents in a really easy way. I'll drag that over there. I'll drag test.docx into my Chrome browser when I have this extension enabled. And let's go look at the markup for the main document part. And what we're going to see here is this alternate content block that says there's a situation where there's both old and new markup in this document. In other words, there is a situation where there is transitional markup using VML and non-transitional markup, in other words, strict markup using DrawingML. This DrawingML element here is part of the strict Open XML standard specification. And if we drop down here, we see this w:"picked element, and inside of that, we see these elements in the V namespace, and those are in VML, and those are what are called transitional, or perhaps we might call them deprecated elements. Because of the way that our program was written, we see this paragraph down here in the VML, and in the DrawingML, we also see this paragraph down here. So the code that we wrote, the somewhat simplified code that we wrote, actually finds both of those paragraphs and outputs the text of both of those paragraphs. To explore this further, I've written another little OpenXML program that goes through all of the elements in the main document part and dumps out the element names of those elements. This dump element method here, it's a recursive method that we call this method from the main method up here, passing in the root element of the main document part, which is this document element right here. And then down here in dump element, it prints out the name of the element. And then if there are any child elements, it dumps out those elements also. It uses a bit of code up here to count the number of ancestors so that we can output these elements indented properly. And when we look at the output of this program, we can see the alternate content element, the choice element, the drawing element, and then we'll drop down here a little bit further and we see the fallback element and its child picked element. So let's take advantage of the markup compatibility and extensibility functionality in the Open XML SDK. The only change I've made to this program to dump out the elements is I've set up the Open XML SDK to do markup compatibility and extensibility processing. I've newed up an open settings object, and then I've set the markup compatibility process settings property in that object to a new markup compatibility process settings object. I've told it I want to process all parts, and I've told it that I want to use Office 2010 for the file format. And let's run this example program. And look at this. Now we don't see the alternate content element, we don't see the choice element, and we don't see the fallback element. And all we see is the contents of the choice element, because the Open XML SDK knows that Office 2010 can handle this drawing and anchor element properly, that these are part of drawing ML, and therefore these are the elements that it exposes to us in the API. It completely hides all of those other elements. It hides the fallback element, and it hides the markup compatibility and extensibility elements. If I change this to Office 2007, then look at this. I now only see the VML elements. It only read and showed to my program, or exposed to my program, the VML elements which are in the fallback element. It knows that these are the elements that Office 2007 understands, and so therefore it completely hid all of the drawing ML elements that I don't want to process and I don't want to include in the generated document or in the modified document. So you should note what you pick for this option right here, this file format versions option. This is dictated by which version of Office you want to be able to read the documents that you're going to modify or generate using the Open XML SDK. So now let's go back to our first program, the one that gets the entire text of the document, and let's modify that program so that it uses the markup compatibility and extensibility features of the SDK. And here we are. This program is exactly the same as the first program that I used to extract the text from the document, but the only difference here is that I've told it that I want to use markup compatibility and extensibility processing, and that I want it to process all parts, and that I want it to only write documents that are applicable to Office 2010 or later. And when I run it, we see exactly what we wanted to see. We see those 4 paragraphs, and we see the text in that text box in such a way that it's only output one time, and that's what we want. There are 3 options here in this markup compatibility process mode. We can set it to no process. If we set it to no process, then we will see that alternate content element, we'll see the choice and the fallback element in our processing of that document. If we tell it we want to process all parts, then this will do that processing and save our document with all parts processed. In other words, even if we don't modify one particular part and we tell it that we only want to use the fallback content, or we want to use only the choice content, then this will be the case in every part in that document. Alternatively, we can tell it to process loaded parts only, and in this particular case where I'm only accessing the main document part, we would only have that MCE processing be applicable for the main document part. If there were alternate content blocks in other parts, they would be left as is. There you have it. That's markup compatibility and extensibility processing in the Open XML SDK.